Welcome, everybody. We'll wait just one more minute because people are still joining before we start. Thank you. Okay, welcome everybody to the launch of a new, relatively new project, the APRICOT project, which stands for Advancing Prevention Research in Cancer Through Ontology Tools. This started last year and runs through to 2029 and is funded by the National Institutes of Health. Before we get going, just a few housekeeping rules. We've switched everybody's camera and audio off, but you can ask questions or make general points in the Q&A box. So please do that. And also you can upvote questions and we'll aim to answer as many as we can. So we've left a couple of 20-minute slots for discussion, and I hope we can get through as many questions. It's being recorded and will be shared via the website after the event, along with both the transcript and the slides, either for you to look at again or share, or for those who weren't able to make it. And we'll send a follow-up email, including a feedback poll and links, also QR codes will be included in the webinar. So hopefully you'll be able to get through to websites and other information that will be helpful to you. So I'm Professor Susan Michie. I'm at University College London in the UK, and I'm Principal Investigator of the APRICOT project. This is the team. We're a group of collaboration of behavioural and computer scientists and ontologists. The investigators, myself, Janna Hastings from the University of Zurich, Bill Hogan from the Medical College of Wisconsin, and Marta Marques from the National School of Public Health in Portugal. And the researchers working with us are Paulina Schenk, Maya Brown, Colby Reid, and Carolina Silva. And on the right, we have our consultants, Robert West, who will be addressing us today, Mary Johnston, and Alex Rothman. And this work builds on, you'll see in the right-hand corner, there's HBCP in the picture of APRICOT, the Human Behaviour Change Project, which I think some of you will be familiar with, which was a 6-year, in the end, project developing an ontology, a behaviour change intervention ontology, which I'll briefly describe, and associated AI, ML tools. But this project is very much set up to build on it and to make what we've produced more accessible, useful, and usable to the broadest community possible. So the webinar on the right-hand side, you'll see how we're going to run it. We have Bruce Chorpita, who I'll introduce shortly, talking about advancing the behavioural and social sciences through ontologies. Then Rick Moser from the National Institutes of Health on perspectives on ontologies from an applied behavioural scientist. Then Janna Hastings on using ontologies to understand and predict behaviour. We'll then have discussion. I'm sure there'll be many questions and points you'll want to raise at that point. And then we'll go on to Robert West, presenting on tools and resources for research and intervention development. Bill Hogan on linking data sets and knowledge across silos. And Marta Marques on co-production and building a community of practice. And then we'll have more Q&As. Okay, so ontologies, I came across ontologies as a way of addressing problems in behavioural science. And I just want to raise a couple of them here. So on the left-hand side in the blue box, you've got a couple of problems that we have. We have large amounts of variably reported research, something like 100 new evaluations of behaviour change interventions every week. And is reported in many different ways. And anybody who's tried to do a systematic literature review and synthesize evidence will know the frustration of trying to put evidence together when it's so variably reported. And we also have silos of knowledge. You know, behavioral sciences cover many disciplines: psychology, anthropology, geography, sociology, etc. and we use different languages and terms. So going along the top left, the top row here, we've got reporting is often incomplete and or ambiguous. Data aren't joined up. So what are some solutions? Developing a shared language across these disciplines, across sectors, across domains of study, and also shared structure for knowledge, so we can bring the knowledge together. Because as we know, this is much more powerful in terms of actually advancing our understanding of behaviour, how to enable its change. So ontology is a way of doing this. And then if we look at the bottom row, we have another problem, that the amounts of data, the number of reports are just too large and complex to be analysed by humans. So solutions here are automating the process, including artificial intelligence and machine learning. And ontologies make data and knowledge computer readable. So it directly enables this kind of complex analysis to happen. So what is an ontology? Well, on the right-hand side, you've got a very simple ontology. Basically, it's entities, well-defined entities, and well-defined relationships between them. So a formal system for representing the world that provides clarity, consistency, and coherence. These are all bedrocks of good science. They consist of uniquely, precisely defined entities and relationships with other entities. And as I said, very importantly, computer readable. And this forms the basis for powerful searching, synthesis, inference, and prediction. It's used extensively in science, engineering, commerce, and we in the social and behavioral sciences need to embrace these. Okay, here is a bird's eye view of the behavior change intervention ontology. So for every box and part of a box, there's a whole ontology sitting below it. So think of the ontology. There's often between 200, 250 entities on several hierarchical levels and a series of relationships between them. So on the left-hand side at the bottom here, we have the intervention, the content. These are behavior change techniques that have the potential to change behavior, and then various aspects of how they're delivered, the source, the schedule, the mode, etc. All of these need to be defined so we know precisely what intervention we're talking about. And these lead to hopefully a change in the outcome behavior through various processes or mechanisms of action. This is where the theoretical constructs come in. And again, there's a very large ontology of mechanisms of action that, again, probably more than 200 and quite a complex relationship. These are all published. You can have a look at them. But if we want to understand the impact of the intervention on outcome behavior, we have to not only understand what the mechanisms of action are, but what the modifying factors are in terms of engagement. To what extent has the intervention reached its target population? To what extent has that population been exposed to it? And then the context. You know, we know that interventions have variable effects according to the population, the setting, and particular events that may have happened. So really, this is a structure for putting all the knowledge about behavior change intervention scenarios together with research study methods to then produce an actual value, an actual data point. So describing interventions in detail, structuring it in a very logical, consistent way means that we can bring data together at scale, at speed, and analyze it using AI. So the APRICOT project enables to make the use of ontologies, because as you can see, this is quite a complicated structure, enable much easier use of ontologies in the behavioral and social sciences. And we're doing this by developing a suite of tools and resources, some of which you'll hear about today. Extending the ontology, we very much focus on one behavioral domain, which was smoking cessation, and we're moving on to physical activity. But I should emphasize, this ontology can be used for any behavior. And we've all begun specific collaborations where we're extending it because a collaboration wants to use it. For example, we've been working with a transport group, so we're developing the ontology into transport behaviours. And then we're also going to be doing work to link this ontology to other ontologies, because this is one of the beauties of ontologies, is it allows you to link with all these other data sets that may not be in your own direct field. And finally, we're building a global community of users so they can help co-develop these tools and resources. So we make sure that they're maximally useful for the people who are going to use them. Good. Well, I hope that's enough of a general introduction, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Professor Bruce Chorpita, who's from the Department of Psychology at the University of California in Los Angeles. And Bruce has played, Dr. Chorpita has played a very important role in many roles, but one of them has been on the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine report that I think reported 2 years ago about how to advance the behavioural and social sciences through ontology. So this was a really important report. He's also his general work is aiming at strengthening communities and improving lives by creating better structures for human collaboration guided by science. So, you know, what a worthy aim. And we're delighted, Dr. Chorpita, to have you with us. Over to you.
Good morning if you're where I live. Good afternoon everywhere else, I guess. And thank you for having me here. I'll say a couple of quick things and then leave time for everyone else. I'm super grateful to be here today. And I think just a couple of points I want to make for folks who are here listening and learning about ontologies. I've been asking people for the past year, what do they think the most valuable asset that humans have ever created is? And I get various answers, but no one has said that our accumulated knowledge is not a plausible contender for first place. So the hundreds of years of accumulated experiences and observations are what enable us to keep advancing and doing things that make humans who we are. And this project, like a lot of the work Susan's been doing, is about taking better care of that precious asset that, you know, we're very good at producing knowledge. We have thousands and thousands of papers that we publish, new discoveries every year. Healthcare has what, 80, 90 systematic reviews a day that get published, right? So we produce way more than we can organize and consume. So if we don't do this work, we can't realize that the value, right? I like to think of Alan Newell's definition of knowledge as the potential for action. And so what is the point of knowing if we can't act and change what we do? And we can't do that if this work doesn't happen. And I just will say, I feel like meeting this team, I feel like I've been in this space for 25 years thinking this way. And so to be invited to be part of a team that prioritizes organizing the discoveries of others rather than simply making their own discoveries. It's a rare and valuable experience for me to feel like I'm among kindred spirits who want to shepherd all that we already know and make it useful for people who invested and paid in so that we could have all these discoveries. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm delighted to be here, and I'll be here for the Q&A if folks have questions for me as well.
Thank you. Very, very wise words, and you know, exactly sum up why we're doing what we're doing. Thank you. We're now going to hear from Dr. Moser, who is on holiday, sends his apologies. Dr. Rick Moser is scientific officer for the grant that is funding us and has been extremely helpful throughout. He's also the Research Methods Coordinator for the Behavioural Research Programme at the National Institutes of Health and the Training Director for the Division of Cancer Control and Population Sciences at the National Cancer Institute. And he has recorded a message for us. So over to you, Dr. Moser.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rick Moser. As you can see, I'm going to be presenting today on perspectives on ontologies from an applied behavioral scientist. I'm definitely more of an applied researcher, so I think a lot about what ontologies can do and help us accomplish in our research. And I'm sorry I'm not able to join today's meeting, but I do look forward to working together as this project progresses. All right. So let me tell you a little more about myself first. As you can see, I've been working at the National Cancer Institute, specifically in the behavior research program for over 23 years. I was trained as a clinical psychologist, but mostly been focusing on research and also directing training for our division here. I do co-direct a health survey called HINTS, the Health Information National Trend Survey, and I lead a common data element harmonization project called GEM, which stands for Group Evaluated Measures. And really, most importantly for our time here, I'm the project scientist for the NIH grant that supports the APRICOT project. All right. I think a lot about, again, as applied researcher, how can we do science more efficiently? And I love this quote from our 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, where he says, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." I love this idea that we really need to kind of sharpen our tools, and that's what's really going to make us most efficient. And I really do think a lot about that. And of course, I think about things like ontologies as important tools, which I'll show a little more about that. But of course, we have many challenges as we kind of think about research now. Many of these you're probably very aware of, so I'm probably speaking to the choir here. But this idea that science is not done in a vacuum. We have multidisciplinary research, which has its own use of terms and definitions and associations between terms. And of course, we have multi-level research, things done at, let's say, cell to society. And again, between all of that, again, you have a kind of a mixture of terms and definitions, and it makes it very difficult. And of course, we have multiple existing terminologies that reflect this, whether that's MESH, the medical subject headings, or SNOMED, systematized nomenclature of medicine, or ICD. You're probably familiar with all of these. But again, they tend to kind of look at different aspects, whether it's electronic health records or other things, which makes it very difficult. And again, because these different nomenclatures or terminologies have different definitions, really you get these things like jingle-jangle fallacies, and you're very familiar with these, so I won't go into define that because you're all very familiar with those. And of course, we have underutilization of ontologies to kind of organize all the information. That's really kind of lacking here. And of course, because of that, it's very difficult to link data, compare data, merge data because of this, because you don't have common data elements, and that becomes very difficult. And of course, lack of interoperability of all these resources, whether it's ontologies or other just kind of data systems. And then you have kind of just social issues around inability or unwillingness to share data. As you know, NIH is now making a mandate on sharing data, so we're kind of forcing that issue. And ultimately, we really need to increase scientific efficiency. I think about a lot about that and create cumulative knowledge. How can we share information, create a cumulative knowledge so it isn't silos of information out there? And of course, we have a lot of tools to help with that. And I really do think APRICOT can really help with that, with all the different areas that it has a focus on. So I think it's really a fantastic way of kind of addressing a lot of these challenges. Now, I did borrow this slide from Susan. Thank you very much, because I think it does a really wonderful job of kind of delineating the problems with the sheer amount of information and how ontologies can provide a structure to bring order to all of the chaos. And Susan talked about this earlier. So I love this slide. Again, it does a really nice job of illustrating that. And then I said, okay, that's really cool. Let's start with ontologies, and now what can we build on that? And I do think of ontologies in many ways as providing a backbone to support the use of common data elements, which you're all very familiar with. And of course, when we have common data elements, we have more ability to kind of harmonize data. And then once we have harmonized data, I think a lot about how we can now do data integration, pulling two data sets together, data linkages, with different information, whether that's at the person level or maybe a geographic level, and then compare data. How can we maybe we have similar outcomes similar common data elements that were collected in 2 different studies, and now we want to compare across those studies. Again, this idea that by doing that, we're doing things more efficiently, and again, this idea we want to create cumulative knowledge, which I think is really very exciting. And so ultimately, we want to support doing novel research that involves kind of answering questions you cannot answer with any one data set. And to me, ultimately, that's exactly what we want to do. And I think ontologies can play a very, very important role in that. All right, I think this is where I'm going to stop. Thank you for your time. Congratulations to the APRICOT team, and I really wish you a successful kickoff. And I really do look forward to working with everybody in the near future. And again, sorry I was not able to attend today. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Moser. That was really helpful. And I think I really take on board this issue, which I think as behavioral and social scientists, we need to take on board really seriously, that we have very complex questions that we want to answer. Behavior is complex, people are complex, our environments are complex. And that does mean that we do need to link data up. No one data set is going to be enough to answer the kind of complex questions we want to address. So, having said that, delighted to hand over to Dr. Hastings, who is going to talk about the use of ontologies for understanding and predicting behavior. Thank you.
So I have, so hi everybody, it's really great to be here. I have just a few real world examples to give of how you can use ontologies in practice, just to give sort of an idea of what this really looks like, or how this usage sort of helps the magic happen. So we start, we don't just build ontologies for no reason, but we build them so that we can do things with them. And maybe you can see through these examples some hint of what this looks like in practice to actually put the ontologies to work. So one example is we use ontologies to do annotations, and these annotations, you can annotate lots of different things. You can annotate data, you can annotate theories or constructs, you can annotate literature or text, you can annotate images and various videos even. But the basic idea of an annotation is you make a link between an ontology class and your raw data of some sort. And this gives you the benefit of being able to absolutely, without question, say that you're sure that this thing, which you've got a good definition for, a reusable definition, which is what you've put in the ontology, that this thing applies in this case. So it's a way of sort of linking up different data sets, linking up different texts or other resources to create ontology backbone construct order. So you're imposing the order of the ontology onto your data. And you can see this in practice here in the example of an annotation of some text, where you have the various different elements of the text which have been highlighted, and these are associated to modes of delivery. Mode of delivery is one of the sub-ontologies of the behavior change intervention ontology, which Susan was mentioning earlier. And you can see here in the text, it's kind of, it's written in a very compact way because this is an abstract that the delivery was face-to-face through an app. These aspects of the mode of delivery can be annotated to the much more elaborate description and categorization that you have in the ontology. We can also annotate different kinds of things. So we talked about using ontologies as a way to understand or increase our understanding of behavior. And of course, capturing an understanding of behavior or of anything else it's commonly thought of as the domain of theoretical representations and testing theories, testing the tenets of theories. And in the behavioral sciences, there are actually not just one, but many theories of behavior change, of behavior, of the drivers of behavior, of the mechanisms of behavior. And when you have so many theories and they all use different terminologies in their constructs, it can be difficult to kind of understand how they relate to each other and how each different theory can contribute to a holistic and integrated understanding of the drivers of behavior. But you can use ontologies here as well. So what we did, for example, we took a data set of theories and their constructs, which had been represented in a kind of ontology-based modeling system, which elaborated the constructs and the relationships between the constructs within each theory. And we annotated that data set to ontology classes. And this allowed us to find connection points between different theories where they had referred in their constructs to similar ontology classes. And this kind of integration is very difficult to do based on the text labels alone, or even the way that people write about the theory content. You really have to take it to a new understanding level, and the ontology can help you do that. Finally, we in the Human Behavior Change project, our end point of one of the work streams was to be able to predict, using an AI model, predict the outcomes of hypothetical interventions based on a data set. And the data set that we used, it was an annotated randomized controlled trial data set. So trial reports that were published in the literature were harmonized and integrated together using the ontology-based annotation. And this created an annotated data set, as well as the ontology that was used to create these annotations. And with this, we used a novel predictive model, which we developed, that was able to integrate both the data and the information or the knowledge that came from the ontology in order to make predictions. And what's really exciting about this is that this approach can be used in other domains, in other models, as long as you can more or less bring together the knowledge and the data which is from the published literature. So it's a sort of addition which you can add to a systematic review workflow to say, okay, now I've got all this data which we've observed already, but there's these situations which we haven't observed yet. Let's make a prediction. Let's see if we can see what the outcome would be based on this data using a predictive model. And in fact, we've implemented this predictive model in a user interface so that not only we, but also others can interact with the predictions. And you can see the predictive interface at this URL, it's a web address, and you can see that basically you can choose settings for your hypothetical scenario for the population, for the intervention content, and it will give you an explainable prediction where you can sort of see both the aspects that the model predicts will enhance the outcome, in this case for smoking cessation, and those that will potentially, in the context of this hypothetical intervention, maybe not, maybe have a detrimental effect on the outcome. But this is, of course, all based on the data that the model was trained on. And we know that the data is not perfect, but at least we can make it explicit and interactive so you can see the impact of the data in real time. That's all I had to say. I'm handing back to Susan for the next part.
Thank you. And I just want to underline the importance of the hypothetical, because all of our evidence comes from data collected in particular settings with particular populations. But when it comes to a policymaker, a clinician, a planner wanting to address questions, they come with questions for their population, their setting, their behavior of interest, and they're wanting to know, the answer to quite complex question, what works for this population in this setting, for this behavior, for how long, through what mechanisms, etc. And this is where we need to really be able to use these kind of sophisticated analyses on very large, complex data sets to be able to answer that kind of complex question. It's not just a question of, does this work? How well does it work? But it's in the context of all those different kinds of variables. So we have some time now for any questions and discussion before we go on to the other speakers. So if all the panelists, including Dr. Chorpita, please do put on your cameras. And we have a couple of, a question and a comment. We also have questions that were sent in advance. And I should say there's 145 people and from very different walks of life. So researchers, from industry, from NGOs, etc. So please feel free to ask any questions from your own perspective. So the first one, Janna, I think this is one for you. Since we are talking about harmonized data, how do you visualize the participation of minorities in the harmonization? considering that AI is often biased by mislabeled data or similar problems?
So I think this is a really good question to highlight potential challenges with AI. And in fact, these kind of challenges are well known for sort of general purpose AI models, which are dealing with text or language or images. But for our prediction model in particular, we do not use a general purpose model. It's rather a specific model which we trained ourselves with the trial data. And although the trial data is itself having biases and things that are absent, we treat each trial as a data point in its own right and only work with the averages of the outcomes for the individual level data. So we don't actually see results segregated by ethnicity or other biased characteristics in our data set. So this is less applicable to our particular scenario, although perhaps Robert would like to add some more comments on this point.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think the key, I think, with the use of ontologies to address this is transparency. What ontologies do is they provide you with clarity of the construct so that you know what it is you're talking about. And that then brings out into the open very often some of these biases and things that are hidden or not mentioned. Because no one thinks to mention them, but when you're kind of forced to confront them, as you are when you use a proper, structured approach with ontologized classes to annotate your data, then you can see what's going on and what the limitations are of the data that you're using. So I think it's a really important point, and I do think that ontologies provide a basis for helping us to move forward on it, as long as those ontologies are developed with the whole of the community, the global community, and all the different stakeholder groups within that in mind, and aren't just reflecting a sort of little bubble around, middle class English people.
Since you're speaking, Robert, maybe you'd like to start off answering this question from Dirk Deron. The prediction tool, I assume, relies on annotating the data or project. What annotation tool would be used to automate the labeling, or was it done manually? And if an additional annotation tool, is there a GitHub link somewhere?
Yeah, so this is what we're working on at the moment, one of the big things we're working on, because the original aim of the Human Behavior Change Project was to test the feasibility of automating annotation using a natural language program, and we spent well over $1 million, I think, on with IBM on trying to achieve that. This is before the advent of these current form of large language models. We did use large language models, but there were a previous version in it, and it wasn't very successful. That automation process. I think what we're seeing now is we're beginning to get into a phase where automation, at least of a substantial part of the classes and entities that you need to annotate, are becoming feasible. I know that Elicit, which is one of the science-based large language model commercial operations, does this with some degree of success, and they're still working on it to improve it. We're also working on ways of automating it using a combination of generative AI and other approaches. I think realistically, though, with the sort of legacy literature that we've got, which to be fair is of its time, but where things are described quite poorly, ambiguously, and in very heterogeneous and idiosyncratic ways, is going to always present a big challenge for an automated process. So I'll be talking in a minute about how we go forward with this, where we meet the automation halfway, at least, by self-annotating our documents and our data sets as we go along using tools that we're helping to build, and others are, to be fair, as well.
Thank you, Robert. There's a question from Stephen Davick that I'll start responding, but Bill, I just wanted to give you advance notice. I wonder whether you or Janna could address the one below, which is talking about transversal tools, which is not a phrase I've come across before. It sounds more for the ontologists here. But while you're thinking about that, Stephen Davick asks, how can we use ontologies to develop better interventions applied for the first time to new behaviours in new populations where there is limited research, e.g. not a large training set like smoking cessation? Well, this was absolutely the inspiration, one of the inspirations for the Human Behaviour Change Project. I sat on a national guidelines committee where we were charged with developing guidelines for public health, often for disadvantaged groups in inner city Britain. And the overwhelming majority of the evidence that we were pulling from was published, guess where? The United States, because that's where the overwhelming majority of research funding is. And the difference between the health services and the public health systems in the UK and the US were very large. And so it's a real issue about how do we generalize from what we know to other very different situations. And a similar lines, another inspiration was also thinking, well, not only is most of the research funding in the US, but also by far and away, most of the research funding is in the richer countries. But where are the really, big problems of health and sustainability? They're in the poorer countries. And so we need to be able to use our evidence to help the global community, not just those who've become rich by rather nefarious means over the centuries. And this requires, how do we generalize from what we know to what we don't know? This requires being able to bring lots and lots of dimensions together and being able to use the kind of prediction tools that Janna was talking about. So this is the vision. I mean, this is, we're starting small scale, because even this, to develop the ontology, when you look at the papers, they're all published in Wellcome Open Research, and you look at the ontologies, you'll see just how complex they are. But we need that kind of complexity to be able to speak to exactly this question about where there's limited research, how can we use other evidence to make inferences using the kind of logical structures from ontologies. So this is one of the real the visions and the promises of what ontologies can do. Okay, having said that, can I hand over to Bill and then maybe Janna to talk about the fact that ontology is developed for specific topics, but what are the advantages of doing this compared to more transversal tools?
Yeah, so I'd like to begin answering this question by pointing out that a major emphasis of the project is integration of behavior change intervention experts and ontologists, and working closely together and really having the experts integrally involved in the ontology development. And that does require new tools and tooling. And so one existing tool is BCIO search.org that helps to navigate and search and browse the ontology. But also, we do tend to build the ontologies to more reflect how things are, and rather than, and then you can view the ontologies in different ways from different perspectives. And so at this point, I'll turn it over to Janna, who can, talk more about probably the specific taxonomies and how they're organized and can be viewed in different ways.
Yep, I think this is, so what you said there at the end, Bill, is really, I think, the key answer to the question. So we don't, in fact, when we talk about building an extension to the ontology for physical activity or for driving behavior. We're not talking about building a whole separate ontology, but actually just extending out the existing ontology with new content, new classes, new definitions, and ultimately then the user will extract a view of the whole ontology. But really, really importantly, that whole ontology is still consistent within itself and fits together as a whole. So you can use it to annotate behavior, physical activity behavior, but you can still use it to annotate smoking cessation. You can still use it to annotate the other new use cases that get added. So I think that actually the ontologies that we built are transversal tools and not kind of domain-specific tools, but you can have domain-specific views on the content, and that's the key sort of powerful element that lets you have your cake and eat it, so to speak.
Thanks.
Can I just add to that something which should be very hopefully apparent to people who use the BCIO and the other ontologies, is that a major component to that is that the ontologies all fall within a common conceptual structure. And we chose basic formal ontology as the common conceptual structure because it's very good. It's not perfect. No representational system is going to be perfect, but it does a very, very good job at capturing the kinds of things that we need to capture in behavioral and social sciences, as well as the medical sciences and biological sciences. So that's a key element, is all working underneath that single conceptual structure.
Yeah. And also importantly, that ontologies aren't fixed. You know, they're developed so that they can be expanded and built on. Before, Marta, I bring you in to talk about this question about collaboration, also about academics and partners from the Global South. Dr. Chorpita, is there anything you'd like to add, stimulated by any of the questions or any of what you've heard so far?
Sure. I have many thoughts. But I'll actually, the one that's sticking with me the most actually was Geronimo's question, the first question about minority involvement and status in the research. And so just speaking from children's mental health, there's about 2,000 randomized clinical trials of mental health outcomes for youth. And only 57% of those report ethnicity in the trials. So that's a tragedy in a way. And but that question was about minority status, not about ethnicity, which is, so they're right, just an ontology to help you understand. So how does ethnicity in a context relate to minority status? It's not statistical minority. And it may mean religion, it may mean class, it may mean many things that are not reported in trials too. So ontologies won't help us fix what's not there in the data, but they can help us see when we do have things, we can be more explicit about what is it we're trying to say here. So for example, if that was about, what I'm really interested in is whether minority stress moderates, whether these interventions are going to work the same way, right? We can at least be explicit about what is it we need to know to advance whether these interventions are going to work in the context we need them to work. And so to me, at least it exposes where the holes are, and it accelerates filling in those gaps, and yeah, just exposing where the priorities need to be. So I think it's a great question, and it does leave us with there's a lot missing in the research we've done so far, I guess I just want to say. So I appreciate that question as a lead off, and I'll pause there. I have lots of other thoughts, but I'm going to let
we'll have another bite of the cherry in a bit. But I absolutely agree. I think because ontologies are trying to represent knowledge in a comprehensive way, it really shines a light on where the gaps are, what people aren't reporting. And so by using it, it's a tool to actually change scientific practice, to actually become more scientific, because a good, thorough description is the bedrock of science, because otherwise nothing else follows. We're slightly behind time, but Marta, I'd really like you to take on the question about collaboration. I know that you're coming back to it later. and also about bringing people from the global south.
Sure. Maybe I'll start with the last one. So as part of the community of practice that we'll be talking about in 15 minutes or so, the idea is really to bring researchers and practitioners from all over the world. So we want to have global representation. And I think that, you know, this question that was posed in the Q&A, and Bruce talked about that also in terms of having people from LMIC countries and also underrepresented populations. It's really important that they are part of the community of practice, because it's really the way that we have to address biases within research and ensure that the ontology captures the diverse backgrounds and knowledge and even language differences that we have between different countries and regions. So for sure, we will be reaching out to the different groups. So through special interest groups of different scientific societies, we're already identifying people that are usually underrepresented in this community of practice groups, and we will show the QR code for that. Everyone is really free to reach out to us and express your interest in collaborating. And then the same goes to the other question about collaboration in relation to use of AI and specific models. We will have domain-focused working groups within the community of practice, and I'll talk about that. That will also include AI use and new tools and LLMs and everything related with that. So it will be really, really good to engage in conversations with people from industry, from other areas outside academia, to see how we can combine efforts and do work together.
Thank you very much, Marta. Okay, well, there'll be time for answering questions in a bit, but maybe panelists can look at the questions meanwhile and see if you can answer any of them on screen. While I hand over to Robert West, who's going to introduce us to some of the tools and resources for research and intervention development. Robert.
Thank you. Yes, so the question that we just had about annotation is very apposite because probably annotation is the single most common, I would imagine, use case for ontologies, and we need to get this right. There are annotation tools out there, but at the moment, they're not quite ready for the kind of work that we need them to do. So one of the things we're working on is that. But so I'm just going to take you through 3 of the tools that are being developed as part of APRICOT, and you can try these out for yourself and have a look at them at your leisure. Some of you will be familiar with at least one of them, 1 or 2 of them. Others, they might be completely new. And the 3 that I'm just going to focus on, one is what is going to be the paper and protocol authoring and annotation tool, PPAT. The current version is PAT, which has been around for a few years in a sort of beta version, and we're just in the process right now of a major re-engineering of it to improve its functionality and to extend its use in annotating and writing papers using ontologies. We're going to the links are in the chat, I think, or will be in a follow-up email. But this one is just paperauthoringtool.com, and you can have a look at it. It was originally written, hence the name, for authoring papers, and it arose out of my experience as a journal editor, but also as someone who does a lot of randomized trials. Of the difficulties that authors have in and reviewers have in reviewing and journals have in publishing really good write-ups of randomized trials, because even with the guidance from consorts and others, there's still a huge amount that is left to the author to sort of guess at and very often get wrong. So what this does is it takes you through really, really granular step-by-step process of inputting the information, and it writes a draft of the paper for you in a Word file. But key from our perspective here is that it produces a machine-readable version of the paper, which you will have already, in writing the paper, have effectively self-annotated using ontologies, because every key construct in the paper, there's an opportunity to look up the relevant ontology class and enter it there. So, and it'll produce a very nicely structured, what's known as a JSON file, which is just a standard database file. That's being extended to cover protocols, which isn't a big stretch. You could already use it for protocols if you wanted, but it will make it easier in the future, and for annotation. Next slide, please. The second tool which we're upgrading and extending, many of you I know will have already used this tool. This is the TATS tool, the Theory and Techniques tool. It gets about 2,000 users coming onto it a month, so we know that it's very widely used. What the tool does is to provide you with a way of linking using a pretty extensive project that Susan led on over a number of years, linking mechanisms of action, such as knowledge of consequences and so on, to behavior change techniques such as goal setting, action planning, and so on. And it tells you at the stage that it was that the tool was originally created what the likely connections are between them. And it's a very useful tool, but it's now a bit out of date and it needs extending a bit. So what we're doing is upgrading it, linking it to the new behavior change intervention ontology, so that it's more in line with the way that we are now conceptualizing things. Alongside this, we're also working with, if you go to the next slide, with a number of stakeholders, WHO, Public Health Wales, various other groups, to construct a more extensive tool for identifying mechanisms of action that may be useful in a particular intervention, given your intervention goals, and then selecting the relevant behavior change techniques. And the way we're doing that is at the moment, having a back end as a Google spreadsheet. Google has very good APIs for linking to whatever front end you might want, but we're also aiming to build a user-friendly front end for it. At the moment, it can be used. You have to be a bit of a power user to use it, but again, the link will be in the information afterwards. So those are three of the tools that we're building, and I just want to mention that and all those tools actually are available if you go to the behavior change, the Human Behavior Change Project website, which has already been mentioned. But I also want to mention in relation to annotation that we're building prototypes for data schemas from which people can build either manual or automated or semi-automated tools for data collection. But as a basis for that, you need to have data schemas. You know, what does the data set that you're creating have to look like so that it can be used for various use cases that we need.
Thank you very much, Robert. Okay, next I welcome Bill Hogan, who's going to talk about linking data sets and knowledge across silos. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. So a key theme of the APRICOT project is integration. And of course, a key way to facilitate integration is through interoperability of data and systems. And one particular type of data that we're very keen on ensuring is interoperable with behavior change intervention data is social and environmental determinants of health data. So the WHO defines social determinants of health as the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age, as well as people's access to power, money, and resources. And of course, these things have a powerful influence on health and health equity. Next slide, please. So these social and environmental determinants of health are very relevant to behavior change intervention research. So this is from a paper on the topic of social determinants of health and behavior change research. And they give an example which we found quite poignant. A randomized controlled trial of a psychosocial intervention targeting smoking and pregnancy would be concerned not only with determining how and why such health behavior interventions work, and this emphasis is mine, but also with understanding how the conditions where pregnant women work, live, and play result in differential exposure to social determinants that subsequently alter the pathways through which behavior change techniques might impact purported mechanisms of action. And the link to that paper is at the bottom of the slide if you're interested in pursuing that further. Next slide, please. So in essence, what we're doing is we're enhancing the context that Susan described earlier when she described the figure that summarizes the project. So the social and environmental determinants of health are additional context to the research. Next slide, please. And we're pursuing real-world data as a source of these social and environmental determinants of health because we can reduce the data collection burden potentially. So, these data are increasingly collected in electronic health records at the individual level. Also, people will use area level determinants of health from census data as a proxy for individual level. So in the United States Census, for example, we tabulate data by what's called census tract, which is a small geographic region covered by census takers. And the data are summarized at the total, counts of everybody in the tract. And increasingly, there are a number of social and environmental determinants of health screening instruments. So that these instruments don't have data models defined in detail. So if we can annotate these screening instruments, we can help people integrate the data as they model them. Next slide. And a key ontology that we're harmonizing with the BCIO is the ontology for modeling and representation of social entities, or OMERCI for short, which is part of, along with BCIO, the Behavioral and Social Science Ontology Foundry. And OMERCI represents social entities with a focus on many important determinants of health. So it represents people and institutions in society that we create and other social entities. Again, with a focus on determinants of health. And a key goal of the project is to have OMERCI and BCIO be interoperable ontologies. Next slide. And so key activities, we will expand OMERCI to cover key determinants of health for tobacco cessation and physical activity, improve its interoperability with the BCIO and other BSSO Foundry ontologies, annotate the screening instruments with our ontologies, and annotate area level data with the ontologies. And we will broadly disseminate these work products through the various mechanisms that we will disseminate all the products of the project.
Thank you very much. And before our final speaker, just to let everybody know that quite a lot of your questions are being answered in the Q&As, just in case we don't get through them all, but do come back and ask more questions if you want to, or if you feel you want more information to those questions, which we'll come back to shortly. But before we do, over to Marta Marques, who's going to talk about co-production and building a community of practice, which is where I hope many of you will come in and work with us over the next few years.
Thank you, Susan. So as Susan mentioned at the beginning of this launch, one of the main purposes of APRICOT is really to improve the tools that we are developing, the ontologies, and how they can be usable and useful for the broad group of researchers and practitioners all over the world. And we really want to have a broadest community possible. So the main purpose of the community of practice is really to bring together ontology users and people that are interested in using ontologies from different fields and backgrounds. And it was also mentioned that when we talk about behavioral science, we talk about different disciplines. We also talk about academia, people not from academia, but from industry, third sector, etc. And we really want to have this represented as part of the community of practice. Within the Human Behavior Change Project, there was a lot of work done to involve the broader community of researchers that provided stakeholder feedback and consultation in the development of the various ontologies. But within the APRICOT, we wanted to go a step further and really create a platform that could work as a co-creation platform that could foster learning and knowledge sharing, so that we make sure that what we are developing is really relevant, useful, and captures all the knowledge that exists around behavior change interventions. Next slide, please. So there will be many opportunities for members to contribute to the community of practice. In this slide, you can find some core ones. So one thing that we will be engaging with the members of the community of practice is in testing and evaluating ontology tools and the usability of these tools, both for intervention design that was mentioned by one of the participants, but also for reporting and annotation. We'll also engage the community of practice members to propose and assess new ontology classes and applications. As Janna mentioned, we are extending the existing behavior change intervention ontology to other behaviors, such as physical activity and sedentary behaviors. And community of practice members will be able to provide feedback on new classes and also provide suggestions for what can be included and how it can be best applied. And in relation to this, and I briefly mentioned this when I was answering one of the questions, we will develop domain-focused working groups, either on topics such as physical activity, also on aspects such as behavior change techniques, but also on the use of AI, prediction tools, all of the domains that we are looking at, integration with other ontologies that Bill was talking about. And we will have this domain-focused working groups that will be able to have more iterative connections and more points during the project to provide input for the specific bits of work. We are building at the moment the community of practice in the Discourse platform. So for those of you that will register your interest in being part of the community of practice, we will contact you. And once the platform is running, we will provide specific instructions on how to join through the platform. Next slide, please. There are some activities that are already planned, and we hope to kick off the community of practice after the summer. We will be doing training and webinars on ontology tools and applications on specific elements and more broadly on how to use these tools. We will have an online community forum that will be running throughout the APRICOT project where there can be interaction at any time. We will develop a knowledge base for shared resources. So if you go to the website, you already see that we have a lot of resources that are shared. We want to increase this and have living documents there and have them as updated as possible. And also we were going to create a mentorship program to support those that are starting to use ontologies, to learn how to use them and to be able to build capacity on how to use them for different behaviors and different contexts. And just to finalize, for those of you that are interested in joining the community of practice, you can scan here the QR code. The link was also sent in the chat. You can also join our newsletter to get more information about how to get involved in this project. And of course, we are happy to engage in further conversations about collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe if you leave those up, those QR codes up for a bit longer, that would be helpful. And if somebody could, in the Q&As, so that everybody can see the Q&As, I think, put the website, both of the APRICOT, which is actually www.humanbehaviorchange.org, and the Behavior Change Intervention Ontology website, which is www.bciontology.org, I think. Then people will have those to hand. So as I said, quite a lot of the questions have been answered in the chat, but you may want to come back on them. You may want to ask more questions. So I'm going to start off with two to do with outcomes from Nancy Rose Piazza. Is there any interest in standardizing desired outcomes that would like to be seen in a population or individual who apply behavior change techniques? And from Fiona Curran, are you using core outcome data sets already, or outcome sets already developed? Who would like to begin with that? And Dr. Chorpita, do put your camera on if you'd like to be part of the final panel session. So, outcomes and standardization. I mean, I'll start with how I see it, is that we're not actually standardizing the outcomes. What we're doing is finding the outcomes and looking at which ones are aligned and representing them in ontologies in a way that we can then take ones that seem similar together. So we're looking at, and this is some work that we're just beginning to do in terms of sort of degrees of alignment, from, you know, absolute one-to-one mapping to aligned but not identical to similar. Because the people who've asked this question are right. It's another real problem that's holding us back. There are so many different measures of everything, outcomes included, and we need to be able to you know, make sense of these and synthesize. So ontology can help with that, but they don't in themselves standardize anything. Robert, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I mean, the short answer is absolutely we must be standardizing outcomes, because although there are often very good reasons in particular studies why you would decide that you want to measure an outcome in a very idiosyncratic way that isn't comparable with anything else anyone's ever done, those ought to, in 99.99% of cases, be outweighed by the importance of having a measure that is comparable with what other people have done. So I think that is a very important goal. In the field of smoking cessation, which is relatively straightforward, it's not straightforward, but it's relatively straightforward compared with a lot of areas, this has kind of been done, but only up to a point. I was involved in creating a particular standard that's widely used, and the Society for Research in Nicotine and Tobacco have a very similar one. But when you want to standardize anything, you have to be very aware that it may not meet the needs of everyone, and that different people are going to take different views. And so you don't want to hegemonize the whole thing. But what ontologies can do is to provide you with a standard language for describing your outcomes, whatever you choose to make those outcomes. And one of the things we're working on in the smoking field is precisely that, using the behavior change intervention ontology to create a detailed guidance for people when they're reporting their outcomes, to tell you enough about the outcome in a sufficiently standard way so that they can compare what you've achieved, what you've found with other people. And that includes things like, what is the class of behavior? Is it tobacco use? Is it cigarette smoking? Is it smoked tobacco use? Is it nicotine use? And so on. The class of behavior. Aspects to do with the timing of behavior. Is it from 2 weeks post-abstinence to 24 weeks, and so on? Is it biochemically verified? Is there, you know, what are the methodological factors? All of these things make a difference to what your outcomes are. And if you don't code that information or annotate it, then it's going to, people can't really make head or tail of it. So yes, definitely, this is a movement, you know, there's a movement in this direction. And I think the ontology provides you, at the very least, as Susan says, with a standard vocabulary and structure for doing it, even if you decide that you don't want to go the whole way and use a sort of common standard at the end of it.
Before I bring you in, Marta, Maya would like to answer the question too, but could I ask Maya, Carolina and Paulina to take your cameras, put your cameras on so that you can be part of the panel also, if that's possible. Welcome, Maya. Welcome, Carolina, and hopefully welcome Paulina, who are researchers doing a huge amount of work on this project. So, Paulina, hi. Okay, Marta and then Maya.
I just wanted to add to what Robert was saying as part of the extension for physical activity, sedentary behaviors, and sleep, because we're looking at the 24-hour movement behaviors. We are revising what exists at the moment in terms of core outcome sets for these behaviors, together with the rest of the literature, to be able to capture existing classifications and see how they fit within the ontology when it comes to annotating for outcomes and representing potential and possible outcomes for physical activity in the world. So this is obviously taking into consideration, but as Susan and Robert was saying, the ontology aims to capture all possible characteristics and attributes of those outcomes and behaviors.
Thank you. Maya.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm not sure, I don't think I have anything to add actually to Robert and Marta. I think I accidentally raised my hand earlier before everyone was done speaking, but all my points have been made. So thanks, Robert and Marta.
Okay. So we do have questions from before, but also there's a long question which has got quite a lot in it from John O'Neill. And I think it raises an important issue about the difference between meta-analyses and using ontology-based predictions. So if I can read it out, and I'm sure Janna and Robert will want to jump in, but probably others will too. John says, the prediction tool is a great window from the past into the future that is evidence-based. Given the gaps in what even the most stringent systematic reviews can synthesize about the past evidence due to incomplete reporting, how important does the present become in behavioral interventions? Specifically, the degree to which behavioral interventions can be conceived, conducted, and reported in ontologically conforming fashion. Are there plans for APRICOT to develop proactive intervention tools to support researchers in the build phase? Janna, would you like to start with this one?
Yes, so I really love this question, and I think it gets to the heart. So it's a question about what you can do at the moment and then what you should do, right? So we can put together the evidence we have, but we can't put together any evidence we don't have. We've talked about being able to shine a light on the gaps, and there's definitely room to sort of highlight those gaps, those evidence gaps, in order to design specific data collection exercises in order to inform better understandings in areas where we don't have those good understandings, and the ontology can support that. But I think there's also an element of changing sort of background, in the sense that the world changes and other things change. So we need to have, you know, more in our model which captures the difference between the present and the past explicitly. And this aspect, I think we really can do a lot more to represent and to learn how to encode into our knowledge systems and our data explicitly. And with that, I'll hand over to Robert to carry on this topic.
Yeah, this is such a great question. I mean, it absolutely goes to the heart of applied behavioral science, because when we do meta-analyses, we answer, usually there for a specific question. How effective is nicotine replacement therapy or nicotine patch compared with placebo in aiding smoking cessation, whatever it might be? They're often binary questions. They're often aggregating over populations, over masses of things that you often really can't aggregate over, even though you do your heterogeneity analysis and it doesn't show massive heterogeneity. That doesn't mean that, you know, you've that you're out of the woods there. So what we've got at the moment is a very, very simplistic approach to average effect sizes of things that we've done. what we need, what every intervention designer and policymaker needs, is a prediction about what's going to happen when they try and do X, Y, and Z with their population, with their setting, and so on. That's a completely different job. And so what we're trying to move from in this project and with the Human Behavior Change Project, and I think generally in behavioral science, is to go from simplistic average effect sizes to genuine prediction in what will, and let's not put too fine a point on it, what will always be a novel scenario. It may be sufficiently similar that you feel confident that your predicted effect sizes are from a regression analysis or from a simple meta-analysis would do the job. But we know only too well that that's quite likely not to be the case in many scenarios. There's so many examples of where we've been confident that we would get a particular effect when we move to when we apply something and we don't get it. So this is what we're doing, and I think the other thing statistically that we have to move away from and towards is we need to move away from this sort of meta-analytic approach where we look at variance accounted for in our existing data set to cross-validation in new sets. So we have a training set, and then you want to cross-validate your potentially quite complex machine learning model for your new data set. So cross-validation is a much harder test. And the paper that Janna's led on the prediction tool, which is out there currently in its first form, goes into that. But it's a huge challenge, and it's a very different kind of mindset. So that's you're absolutely spot on. That's a great question.
Dr. Chorpita, I'm sure these are issues that you've thought about and probably written about at length. Did you want to add to this bit of the discussion?
Sure. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I've been answering John O'Neill's question in my head in 10 different ways. I stepped away to grab our National Academies report off my bookshelf for a second. So this is my low-tech way of doing slides, but there's a graph. No, it's not going to work. Okay, I'll describe it. So there's a graph we put in page 6 of the report that shows intervention techniques over a 60-year history in children's mental health. And it sort of goes up during the 70s and it sort of flattens off. And there really are almost no new techniques that have been developed in the past 40 years. And then there's another line that represents the number of new interventions. And that line takes off like a rocket and just keeps going up steeper and steeper and steeper. And what that tells us is people have been designing recombining the same techniques over and over and over for decades, retesting them in trials. And I guess for a while, not really aware that's what we're doing, right? So when I see things about intervention design, the first thing I want to say is we should be aware of the fact that we're mostly recombining procedures we've known about for decades. There are very few absolutely new techniques that come online that we've never heard of before. And so making it explicit, okay, so what are we doing? What's the name of the game for how we combine these? Are we combining them differently? And then, I don't know, there's something about that question that makes me want to say something about satisficing that we're not necessarily, I don't believe what we're going to do is design the optimal interventions, but rather to say we're managing to reduce the uncertainty that what you're about to do might work by narrowing it down to a set of candidate options that are reasonable based on the science, but that there will be some design that goes on as things unfold, right? That we know that from talking and working with practitioners. So one other point that jumps out to me is I wish we made more interventions that were interoperable. So unfortunately, those 300, 400, actually 900 evidence-based treatment interventions for children's mental health largely do not work together. It would be nice if they did and we didn't rewrite the same things over and over. But then one other thought that jumps out at me from John's question is just that I guess to be a little bit provocative here is to think, well, what if we just didn't think about interventions and thought, what if we simply tried to create a therapeutically intelligent world where all of us knew the things we could do to make healthier choices? And then, so taking it out of this idea of designing interventions and saying, designing a psychologically literate world where the information we need to know about making choices is fed to us or delivered to us in some way, whispered to us, so we could all make healthier choices, and we could get the feedback about when we're not making healthier choices. And maybe we wouldn't need to be designing as many interventions if we lived in a knowledge-rich world like that. So that's another, when I hear the word intervention, sometimes I think I'd like to imagine a world where we go beyond ever needing intervention, or we need it for very, very few of us. So I'll leave it at that. I'll pause there.
Okay, thank you. I think we already answered the one from Dick Derham about the prediction tool. There's a few questions that we got in advance. One of them is asked, what's the biggest challenges been in this project and how did we face those challenges? I think I'd like to sort of broaden that out to what are the challenges to the behavioral and social sciences using ontologies. I mean, I hope we've been able to outline the ways in which it can be very beneficial in really advancing the science and therefore our applications and therefore our ability to make a positive impact in the world. But also, I think it is a good idea to acknowledge the challenges in that for people who are not familiar with ontologies, they can seem quite complex structures, and also the definitions, ontological definitions, can be quite clunky because they have to take on their parent class. They have to be defined in terms of their parents. It's hierarchically organized in order for the semantic structure to work, you know, when it comes to predictions and other kinds of analyses. So in terms of the that particular issue about the definitions, which we have to get really precise for it to be computer readable and really make sense, we also make informal definitions so that it's easier for people to understand. We also have on YouTube, through the Human Behavior Change Project, a series of webinars and a series of training modules. So if anybody can put links to those up before we end, that'd be good. I would encourage you. I mean, if you just go to YouTube and search Human Behavior Change Project, you'll presumably find them. And we also have a user group for a behavior change intervention ontology user group, which was actually kind of generated bottom up, but we're supporting. So that's another way of helping with the sort of taking on a new kind of practice. The other thing is, as behavioral scientists, we know that it's much easier to carry on doing what we've done before rather than invest intellectual and emotional energy and time in learning new things, even if in the long run we're aware that that will be helpful for the long run. We often kind of find it hard to do that. So in a way, that is what the APRICOT project is really for, to really make those challenges in using ontologies as less of a challenge as possible, by developing tools, by developing resources, but absolutely crucial, as Marta was earlier saying, that we do this collaboratively with users, because we've been steeped in this for a long time and we've only got certain perspectives. So in our past work, we've always had user engagement, both from behavioral scientists and from ontologists in developing the ontology. But now, as has been said, you know, we really want this to be a tool for the global scientific community and also the global community who want to use research. And that means we do need to bring in many different perspectives, from many different parts of the world with many different kinds of experience. So, you know, please do sign up to the newsletters. Do join the community of practice if you'd like to be more involved. Do follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn and we're on Blue Sky. So you'll find us there, again, under Human Behaviour Change Project. So I think that was a very good question to ask. Would any of the panelists like to speak to any of the other challenges? But you're only allowed to if you also pair it with a solution. Given we're the last 5 minutes, so we want to end on an optimistic note. That silenced everybody.
Okay, well, I'm sure lots of people will want to say a lot, but I'll just very briefly. I think my own experiences, and I speak as someone who has programmed in machine code before now. Ontologies can be very tricky and daunting, and it can feel like, oh my goodness, this is a bit overwhelming, it's just too much. And I get that feeling most days in dealing with the ontology. So what I would say is, if you get that feeling when you're dealing with ontologies, that's not a bad thing. As was famously said about quantum mechanics, if you think you understand it, you definitely don't. You know, this is work. They're complicated, they're difficult, but they're worthwhile. And we all find our own level, I think, in dealing with them. You know, I've accepted a certain level. I know that I don't, you know, there's not enough hours in the day to go into a lot of the sort of nitty-gritty of it, which fortunately other people on the team do have the expertise for. So don't worry if it feels like it's a bit daunting, because, you know, A, you're not alone, and B, we all have the a level that we're comfortable with, I think.
Great, and I'm going to hand over to Maya for the last word before I wrap up, but just also to say something else about ontologies and my own personal experience. It has really sharpened my thinking, because it's really made me think about what is it that this word or this phrase means, and how does that relate to these other things. So it's been an incredible learning experience, and I definitely feel my brain is bigger than when I started on this. Maya, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that when I first started working with ontologies, it was this huge intimidating thing, and I was a PhD student, and I was kind of looking even at the Human Behavior Change Project, and I thought, wow, they have all the answers, and I'm just here as a little PhD student. And of course that's not true, right? Of course, everyone has part of the answers, and we have to puzzle it together to get to the big answer, hopefully, if there is one. But I also want to say that the more there is, so the ontologies in social and behavioral sciences are relatively new, and we're, you know, working on it and producing more and more people are getting on this, and the more there is, the less you have to do, because you can reuse it and you can collaborate with the people that have already done part of the work. So working with ontologies really is only becoming better and better with time, because so many people have already done so much work that we don't need to be doing anymore.
Thanks, Maya. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've learned something about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we want to do it. And collaboration is the big word there. We want to do it in collaboration, in partnership. We will have one of these, I would say, at least every year, because in a year's time, we'll have lots of updates for you. But meanwhile, we can put on other particular webinars on particular topics that you'd like. So important thing is keep in touch with us. However, we're all on emails. You can find us on email. And as I said, there's the website, there's an email link or a contact link there, the community of practice. And so we hope our paths will cross. And thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for your great questions, very stimulating, and led to a very good discussion. And we look forward to our paths crossing in one way or another before too long. So thank you very much to the speakers, the panelists, those who organised it, but especially all of you who attended. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.